All right. Well, we're gonna just gonna kind of recap a little bit with the Exodus. I know we got a little bit into it last time, but just to kind of get us back in the mode of the story. And the story of the Exodus being the movement from oppression to slavery that, of course, every generation of Jew continues to celebrate every year with the Passover meal, so that they can make that story their own story, so that it comes alive every year. That their ancestors' journey is their own journey. It shapes their identity, and of course, it's used. The Exodus story gets used all over the place outside of Judaism by people who are oppressed, especially African American slaves. Really grabbed hold of that story as an inspiration of God listening to people who suffer and works to bring them freedom. So it's a story that if you are oppressed, it is a wonderful story that is encouraging, but it's also a threatening story if you're not oppressed and you might be of the type of class, etc., or in power, that it's going to threaten, because it threatens those in positions of power, undermines our sense of strength, the sense of privilege. So we get to see a lot of strange reversals going on in the story of Exodus, of where perpetrators of violence then turn around and become the victims of violence, where freedom for some people means the loss of control and even death for others. So it's a very complex story. I mean, we all have it usually whittled down into, oh yeah, okay, we know this story, but really when you dig into it, it's a very complex story that opens, of course, by recalling the migration of Jacob, that of course started with a family conflict. Nice family conflict that brought them ultimately down into Egypt. And the rulers accepted that even though the Joseph and his family were foreigners, they accepted them there with no problem until the policy changed with a new regime, and decides they're a security threat, and they have to suppress them, of course. And in that brutal campaign, of course, to control them, it's let's throw all the male children in the Nile River, and Pharaoh's own daughter even decides that maybe that's a bit too extreme and disobeys him. You've got Shiphrah and Puah, who are the midwives who defy him. So you do get like these little glimmers of hope that even in the midst of this kind of totalitarian sort of regime that you've got going on, there are still people that resist, and they're like, no, we're not going to do this. Whenever we think of Moses, when you think of Moses, how do you think of him?
In appearance or actions?
Just both. Yeah, just
This big man with a beard. Yeah,
big man with a beard. Okay.
powerful.
Charlton Heston.
Yeah.
It's also-
I find it hard to think that he didn't speak well, because I think of him as very strong speaker.
Yes.
And he wasn't, Aaron spoke for him.
Yeah.
There's an insecurity about him
Yes, there is. Yeah.
and a humbleness.
Yeah. Well, and again, it's that, we have kind of that movie image of him, and even like Renaissance, like if you look at Michelangelo and when he did his sculpture of Moses, he's a huge, imposing kind of figure, this really important prophet that's just going to be kind of bigger than life, and yet what we really find is that he is very complex. Yes, he's bold, but he's also very evasive. And he's also prone to fits of anger and rage, and yet also compassion. And he's the one who negotiates with God and intercedes with God. So you see this. The Bible's messy. These stories are messy stories. You never get these beautiful, clear-cut, here's how you're supposed to be kind of stories because they are human. And that interplay between human and God is so complex. And we see that in chapter 2 when Moses is both outraged by when he sees violence, and yet in the midst of that outrage, he winds up contributing to the violence by killing someone. But you see his uneasiness in verse 11. And one day after Moses had grown up, he went out to where his own people were and watched them at their hard labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. Glancing this way and that and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and then hid him in the sand. So he kind of, it's like, whoops, so he tries to hide him. The next day he went out and saw 2 Hebrews fighting. He asked the one in the wrong, "Why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew?" And the man said, "Who made you ruler and judge over us?" You thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian? And Moses was afraid and thought, "Oh, what I did must have become known." When Pharaoh heard of this, he tried to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh, went to live in Midian. So kind of a different, if you still got that 10 Commandments. I mentioned the 10 Commandments to my college students. No one's seen it. It's, it's such an iconic thing for, I think
I was so
a lot of us.
They had no idea what you were talking about. I'm so glad it was the movie.
It was the movie, yes. The movie.
It was just enough of a pause that I was like, you're kidding me.
No. They'd never seen the movie. Never seen the movie. Yeah. Yep. So runs off.
My niece hasn't seen it.
I know. Well, that's because you have all these different things you can watch now, and you're not stuck on Sunday evening during Passover, watch on Easter Sunday, watching the 10 Commandments on ABC. Because that was what you did every Easter or Passover on that Sunday evening was you watched the 10 Commandments. And I think they still play it, but nobody watches it because they have so many other options now. So, but yeah, that was always our thing. It was like, oh, it's time for the 10 Commandments every single year. So,
He sits at a well here.
yep, he sits at a well. He takes off. He runs down over to of course, he crosses over the wilderness of Shur into the land of Midian. So he goes clear across the Sinai Peninsula and winds up in Midian over here. He got pretty far. So actually, that 10 Commandments scene of him crossing the desert probably wasn't too far-fetched of the kind of distance he had to go. He had to get all the way across into Midian to Jethro's camp. But of course, his first stop is a well. It's where you meet your wife. Yep, that's where you meet the girls. Yeah, we're kind of 3 for 3 on romances at the well. We had Rebecca, we got Rachel, now we got Zipporah. Yep, see this pattern. So let's see. Verse 23. During that long period, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out, and their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. And God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. So God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. I was always so much about remembering and hearing with God. So now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. He led the flock to the far side of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And there the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. And Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. And when the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac. I want Cecil B. DeMille's voice. And the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering, so I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. We're going to skip all those. Verse 9, and now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them, so now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. Awesome plan, God. There's a problem. Moses doesn't want to go. Which, kind of, this is always the interesting part of Scripture, is that you've got, God going, yes, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And then humans go,
Why does Moses want to leave his home? I mean, that's where he was born.
well, he was born actually in Egypt, but,
Yeah.
but,
That's what it says here. That's what we're reading.
yeah,
He hasn't gotten any place yet.
yeah. And so he's like, well, yeah, he's in Midian at this point. Yeah. He's way over the Sinai Peninsula and in Midian.
I thought he was just there for
Yeah.
the holiday.
Yeah. But God wants him to go back to Egypt where he's wanted for murder. I mean, where last time he was there, he was Pharaoh, Pharaoh wanted to kill him. So he's like, yeah, no, I don't think I need to go there. But, it asks that question, what do you do when you're called by God? What do you do? You do. You struggle with that. Because Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? It's the first question to try to weasel out and bring the Israelites out of Egypt. And God said, I will be with you. It's an interesting response to who am I? And God's response is not to tell him who he is. His response is to say, I will be with you. Which means it doesn't matter. You are who I say you are. And I'm with you. So there's that. Verse 13, Moses said to God, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me. And they ask me, well, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them? So the first question was, who am I? Second question is, well, who are you? He's like, I'll be with you. Okay, fine. So who are you? Yeah, well, but you got to establish that relationship. He doesn't really know that yet, Who are you? So God says that infamous, yes, I am who I am. Or actually, it can also be in Hebrew, I will be who I will be.
It's not what we conjure him up to be.
Correct. I am who I am. I will be who I will be. And of course, in Hebrew, this is spelled out as the verb Yahweh. I am. And of course, in Judaism, you do not use that word. You do not say Yahweh. Does anybody know the word you actually say? Christians will say it, but Jews will not.
It's not Abba.
No, Abba's father in Aramaic. It's not Jehovah. Jehovah is actually a, lack of a better term, bastardization of Yahweh. It's a bizarre pronunciation. It comes from Yahweh, but it's a weird translational issue that somebody, when they transliterated it, came up with Jehovah. But it's actually just a weird way of saying Yahweh. No, what the term they use is Adonai.
Oh, that's right. Adonai.
Yep, which means,
I remember that song. I love that song.
yeah, which means Lord.
That's Amy Grant's.
So when you see God referred to in the Bible in Hebrew, it will always say Adonai, because You don't speak the word of God. You don't speak the name of God in Judaism. You'll notice if they do use it, like if you go online and you're on a Jewish site and they will say something like God, they will put a dash where the O goes so that they aren't fully saying God. It's because his name is too holy. So suppose I go to the Israelites, who's I am who I am. That is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent you. Moses is not satisfied with this answer. God also said to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. Again, relationship. It's kind of this idea of relationship. Because, the I am gives you sort of that existential sort of this God that is existence and is like way up here. The problem is, how do you take a God that's way up here and deal with a prophet like Moses who's obstinate and doesn't want to go? So there has to be relationship of some sort. And so God is establishing, well, you know who I am because I'm the God of Abraham, I'm the God of Isaac, I'm the God of Jacob, I'm the God of your ancestors. I'm this God that did all these other things. So this is my name forever, the name by which I am to be remembered from generation to generation. And then if you get down to chapter 4, what if they don't listen? Let's just keep throwing excuses out. What if they don't listen or do not believe me? The Lord did not appear to you. The Lord said to him, well, what is that in your hand? A staff, he replied. The Lord said, throw it on the ground. So Moses threw it on the ground and it became a snake. And he ran from it. He's like Chad. Chad does not like the black rat snake. Every time he sees that, he's like, It's our ongoing. If you want to terrify Chad. Yeah, he wants nothing to do with them. So he ran. He ran from it. Wise person. Then the Lord said to him, reach out your hand and take it by the tail. I imagine if God asked Pastor Chad to do that, he'd have gone, nope, not going to happen, God. Honestly, if he told me to do it, I think I'd say nope.
I like snakes, and I don't think I would do
You just, yeah. Gotta reach out and.
There's something.
I don't think they're pretty, but.
Leave the snakes alone, they kill all the little animals that you don't
That
want.
you don't want, right,
Yeah.
that's the same way I am.
Yeah.
I mean, he comes out, he sends himself on my full deck,
Yeah.
slithers along, and they're my eyes, and sometimes they're babies, and they're there for a long time.
Nope.
Yeah, but no rats.
Yeah.
We live off of the river, so no rats.
So turns back into a staff, verse 6. Then the Lord said, put your hand inside your cloak. So Moses put his hand inside his cloak. When he took it out, it was leprous like snow. He says, now put it back into your cloak. So Moses put his hand back into his cloak, and when he took it out, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. And then if they do not believe you or pay attention to the miracles, they may believe the second. But if they do not believe those two or listen to you, take some water from the Nile and pour it on dry ground, and the water you take from the river will become blood on the ground. So Moses says, okay, objection number 1 failed. Let's try strategy number 2. O Lord, I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue. Yeah, sounds like it, Moses. I'm no good at this. I got a D in speech class. I just not a good speaker, just not a good thing. The Lord said to him, who gave man his mouth, who makes him deaf or mute, who gives him sight or makes him blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will help you speak and will teach you what to say. Strategy number 3.
would he not be stumbling and stuttering?
This would be true, probably. The author gives him a pretty good, though, he sounds pretty eloquent according to the author. Now, odds are,
He wrote it himself.
yes, that,
If I was a director of making the movie, I would not have picked I would have not have picked him for Moses.
Charlton Heston?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I would have picked Barney Fife maybe, you know.
Barney Fife.
Well, I'm saying, the complete opposite.
Maybe not
you
right.
know, carry around one bullet with him, you know, that's it.
Yeah. And so strategy 3 is, oh Lord, please send someone else to do it. It's just like, nope, I don't want to do it. Yeah. When your excuses die, you know, it's like, okay, he's ripped away all these excuses that I've had, and it just finally boils down to, send somebody else. Just send someone else. And this is where God kind of has, he's had it. He gets kind of exasperated at this point. It's kind of a humorous encounter if you think about it. I mean, the way it's written really is kind of this humorous back and forth of you know, oh, I don't want to do this. And God's like, and then finally God's like, okay. The Lord's anger burned against Moses, and he said, what about your brother Aaron the Levite? I know he can speak well. He's already on his way to meet you, and his heart will be glad when he sees you. You shall speak to him and put words in his mouth. I will help both of you speak, and I will teach you what to do. He will speak to the people for you, and it will be as if he were your mouth and as if you were God to him. But take this staff in your hand so you can perform miraculous signs with it, and go.
Aaron doesn't have a clue what's coming.
Yeah, I know. And then you got Aaron going, yo, brother, what? We're doing, whoa.
I always wondered why God didn't perform a miracle on Moses and make him an eloquent speaker at this point.
You know, it's, I mean, that's kind of one of the things that God said he would do. I mean, he said, don't worry about it. I'll make sure the words come and all of that. And Moses just kind of kept saying, no. And I think this was just God's way of saying, fine, whatever. You don't want to speak? I'll make him speak. You're still going. You know, I think it was just that exasperation of this absolute being, and this story about all these difficulties about how the human and the divine interact. That to me is, you know, Chad always says he doesn't like the Old Testament because it's got some nasty stuff in it. And it does. It does. It has some horrible stuff in it. But it also has some stuff that, like this, that just, I mean, it really gets you down to, this is the difficulty, this is the struggle between the human and the divine. You know, these encounters that show you how messy it is and how human it is and how, you know, it's not so cut and dried and black and white. Because
I think he needs him to cooperate with him, so he doesn't want to force him against his will. So he's
but he kind of does anyway.
But he's trying to negotiate and make it tolerable for him.
Yeah. So he's going to head off to Egypt. Now, the encounter when he gets there with Pharaoh, you got to think about who and what Pharaoh is, who and what Pharaoh represents. If you're at all familiar, I mean, I remember when I went to Egypt, and if you see the depictions of Pharaoh, I mean, Pharaoh is larger than life. Between the statues that are just massively huge and dominant, even though they're like the pictures are of Pharaoh completely in control. I mean, you know, when he's taking care of somebody, you know, and he's doing this number, he's got the, you know, person by their, you know, hair, and they can't get away, and he's going to kill them. And when he's in his chariot, you know, it's just this, Pharaoh's in control. I mean, there's no question if you go to Egypt and you look at their paintings, who was in control of Egypt? It was Pharaoh. So that's where this is going to come in, because you're going to have someone who has portrayed themselves as having absolute power of not just absolute power, but have declared themselves to also be a god. Yep. Oh, I love Yul Brynner. Too bad he died of lung cancer. When Moses arrives, obviously that's going to get challenged, and when you challenge a god, sometimes you make things worse before you make them better. Chapter 5. Afterward, Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Let my people go so that they may hold a festival to me in the desert." And Pharaoh said, "Who's the Lord, that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go." That's kind of the big issue here, is who's God? I don't know this guy. I'm not going to do this. So they said, the God of the Hebrews has met with us. Now let us take a 3-day journey into the desert to offer a sacrifice to the Lord our God. He may strike us with plagues or with the sword. The king of Egypt said to Moses and Aaron, "Why are you taking the people away from their labor? Get back to your work." Then Pharaoh said, "Look, the people of the land are now numerous, and you are stopping them from working." That same day, Pharaoh gave this order to the slave drivers and foremen in charge of the people: "You are no longer to supply the people with straw for making bricks. Let them go and gather their own straw, but require them to make the same number of bricks as before. Don't reduce the quota. They are lazy. That is why they are crying out, 'Let us go sacrifice to our God.' Make the work harder for the men so that they keep working and pay no attention to lies." So then the slave drivers and the foremen went out and said to the people, "This is what Pharaoh says. I will not give you any more straw. Go and get your own straw wherever you can find it, but your work will not be reduced at all." So the people scattered all over Egypt to gather stubble to use for straw. The slave drivers kept pressing them, saying, "Complete the work required of you for each day, just as when you had straw." The Israelite foremen appointed by Pharaoh's slave drivers were beaten and asked, "Why didn't you meet your quota of bricks yesterday or today as before?" Then the foreman went and appealed to Pharaoh. "Why have you treated your servants this way? Your servants are given no straw. We are told, 'Make bricks.' Your servants are being beaten, but the fault is with your own people." Pharaoh said, "Lazy? That's what you are, lazy. That is why you keep saying, 'Let us go and sacrifice to the Lord.' Now get to work. You will not be given any straw. You must produce your full quota." So the Israelite foremen realized they were in trouble when they were told, "You are not to reduce the number of bricks required of you for each day." When they left Pharaoh, they found Moses and Aaron waiting to meet them, and they said, "May the Lord look upon you and judge you. You have made us a stench to Pharaoh and his officials, and have put a sword in their hand to kill us." Things aren't going well. Moses and Aaron don't get off to a great start with either Pharaoh or the people. This is not going to go well.
Now what happens today with God's call?
Yes.
There's going to be opposition, because when God's going to do something, Satan's going to try to stop it.
Yep. And things are sometimes going to get worse before they get better.
We want immediate results.
Yes, you want immediate results. Everybody would have loved this story if Moses and Aaron had walked in and said, "Let my people go," and Pharaoh went, "Okay."
But maybe no movie.
There would be no movie. No conflict. So Moses returned to the Lord and said, "Lord, why have you brought trouble upon this people? Is this why you sent me? Ever since I went to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he's brought more trouble upon the people. And you have not rescued your people at all." It's just like, okay, you called me you made me do this, and now you're doing this. What's up with that? I've been there. Not quite to that extreme, but it's like, okay, you made me go do this, and now this, really? So the Lord said to Moses, "Now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. Because of my mighty hand, he will let them go. Because of my mighty hand, he will drive them out of his country." And God also said to Moses, "I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob as God Almighty, but by my name, the Lord, I did not make myself known to them. I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, where they lived as aliens. Moreover, I have heard the groaning of the Israelites, whom the Egyptians are enslaving, and I have remembered my covenant. Therefore say to the Israelites, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. I will free you from being slaves, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm, with a mighty act of judgment. And I will take you as my own people, and I will be your God. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God. So, you're going to have this interplay now between Pharaoh and Moses. And it's kind of an interesting interplay because you get these plagues then that come. And the interesting part about that happens once the plagues actually do start is when the plagues begin, that's when Pharaoh starts to vacillate just a little bit. You know, before when it was just let my people go, he's like, no. But then God kind of starts to do things, and that gives Pharaoh a little bit of pause. Chapter 7. Then the Lord said to Moses, see, I have made you like God to Pharaoh, and your brother and Aaron will be your prophet. You are to say everything I command you, you and your brother. Aaron is to tell Pharaoh to let the Israelites go out of his country, but I will harden Pharaoh's heart. Which is an interesting point. He's got a tyrant over the heart. What control does God have over the human heart? And though I multiply my miraculous signs and wonders in Egypt, he will not listen to you. And then I will lay my hand on Egypt with my mighty acts of judgment, and I will bring out my divisions, my people the Israelites. And the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I stretch out my hand against Egypt and bring the Israelites out of it. So Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord commanded. Man, Moses was 80 by the time he starts doing this. You're never too old. You are never too old to be called by God. Let's just...
Somebody calls and says, will you volunteer to do such and such? They're 80 years old.
Doesn't matter. Moses was oh, well, look at Abraham. He didn't even leave Haran until he was 75. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, when Pharaoh says to you, perform a miracle, then say to Aaron, take your staff and throw it down before Pharaoh, and it will become a snake. Verse 12, each one threw down his staff, it became a snake, but Aaron's staff swallowed up all their staffs. And yet Pharaoh's heart became hard, and he would not listen to them, just as the Lord had said. So then we get the plague of blood. And of course, you know, by this you're going to know that I am the Lord. But when the Egyptian magicians do the same thing, Pharaoh's heart becomes hard, and he won't listen. Just kind of this over and over and over again until we get to the frogs, chapter 8. It's kind of an actual logic to how all of the plagues work, actually, if you think about it. I mean, if you poison the water supply, what's going to happen? Well, frogs are going to jump out. Yeah. And eventually, you know, and the frogs are going to die. And when the frogs die, they bring flies and they bring gnats. And then the flies and the gnats, they bring disease and the boils. And, you know, it's just, there's a progression that's natural here. Yeah, the hail that burns like fire is a little different. But here's where his heart kind of vacillates. This is kind of where he starts to go, there might be something to this. Because in verse 8, chapter 8, verse 8, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, pray to the Lord to take the frogs away from me and my people, and I will let your people go to offer sacrifices to the Lord. Moses said to the Pharaoh, I leave to you the honor of setting the time for me to pray for you and your officials and your people, that you and your houses may be rid of the frogs, except for those that remain in the Nile. Tomorrow, Pharaoh said.
Why didn't he say right now?
Don't know. And here's the other thing you have to think of. How bad did this have to stink? Just think of the smell of all these frogs dying. Yuck.
Weren't all these plagues also an attack against all the various gods of the Egyptians?
Yeah, I mean, the Egyptian gods were all part of, creation sort of things, that they had specific domains. So, yeah, they all are representations of those different gods and who really has control. It's sort of like whenever God has his showdowns with Baal, because Baal was the god of thunder and rain and that kind of stuff. And so whenever there is a showdown between God and Baal, it involves weather. So God always attacks the domain of whatever the other god is supposed to be in charge of, to show, no, I'm the one that's actually in charge of this, not you. So tomorrow, Moses replied, "It'll be as you say, so that you may know there is no one like the Lord our God. The frogs will leave you and your houses, your officials and your people, and they will remain only in the Nile." I think part of why he let Pharaoh set it was so that Pharaoh couldn't come back and say, "Oh, well, you knew, when you had planned when all this was going to happen." And this way he lets Pharaoh set the timetable as opposed to Moses setting the timetable. So after Moses and Aaron left Pharaoh, Moses cried out to the Lord about the frogs he had brought on Pharaoh, and the Lord did what Moses asked. The frogs died in the houses, in the courtyards, and in the fields, and they were piled into heaps, and the land reeked of them. In the land stank. When Pharaoh saw that there was relief, what does he do? Hardens his heart. It's like, oh, okay, I got what I wanted. Would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had said. So the Lord said to Moses, "Tell Aaron, stretch out your staff and strike the dust of the ground, and throughout the land of Egypt the dust will become gnats." And they did this, and when Aaron stretched out his hand, blah, 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 they got gnats. Verse 9.
I wonder how the magicians and sorcerers were able to do the first few, and
Well-
then they can't duplicate anymore.
Yeah.
They do the first ones.
God probably allowed them to do the first few, and then was, to heighten the sense of Pharaoh kind of, being hardened, and then still feeling he has some control. But the magicians, in verse 19, the magician said to Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God." But Pharaoh's heart was hard, and he would not listen, just as the Lord had said. Then come the flies. Pharaoh does not like the flies. So in verse 28, once again, he offers, "I will let you go to offer sacrifices to the Lord your God, but you must not go very far. So pray for me, but don't let it last too long." Because then, of course, once the flies are all gone, in verse 32, Pharaoh's heart hardened his heart, and he would not let the people go. His heart was unyielding. He would not let the people go when the plague of livestock. But then when we get to the plague of boils, in verse 12, there's the little shift of, instead of Pharaoh's heart he hardened his own heart. In verse 12, it's, "But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart." So Pharaoh isn't even in control of his own heart. I mean, that's how, that's when you see what God's doing here. It's not just you're not in control of things around you. It's you're not even in control of your own heart here. I even control that. So just kind of underscores the limit of what Pharaoh can do. But he also does this to keep kind of Pharaoh engaged, because if Pharaoh would have relented, it would have just been a little bit too early. So the pressure continues to mount. You keep getting these plagues. Whenever the pressure relents, he resists. And basically, this is a situation in which, he can't control, and that's going to lead to his demise. When you try to control something really super hard that you really honestly have no control over, it will lead to your downfall, as Pharaoh is about to find out. Because chapter 12 then talks about the Passover, the plague of the firstborn, which of course, if you think about this coming all full circle, How did the Exodus story start out? With Moses, but with Pharaoh doing what?
Throwing the babies in the Nile.
Yeah.
The men babies.
Killing the male children. So now we've kind of come full circle, and now who's going to be dying?
Oh, the Egyptians go into the Red
Well, they don't go into the Nile, but the firstborn at this juncture, so of the Egyptians. So you kind of see how things come around. And there's always, the Bible does this a lot. It loves symbolism. It loves this sense of irony, of taking basically what people are doing that's bad and having it kind of come back around on them somehow. That what they are guilty of, then they wind up actually having to deal, that's usually what brings about their own suffering and downfall. So the Passover. This slaughtering of the lambs that they do over the doorways so that the angel of death will pass them by, because the blood is the sign of protection. They're to eat unleavened bread. Everybody knows why do we eat unleavened bread on Passover? Yeah. Yep, there's no time for the yeast. No time for the yeast. The Passover is always a story about the rapidness of God's delivery. This is about when God says, get ready to go, you get ready to go, which means you're not going to sit around waiting for bread to rise and do what it needs to do. It's you put on your traveling clothes and and you grab what you've got and the unleavened bread. And so that's very fitting for people that are ready to just, boom, go on a journey. And so, of course, the firstborn children then of the Egyptians, they die. And they are killed. And this is finally the event that is going to get Moses to go away, get out. And as we continue with this story, so in chapter 12, verse 50, where all the Israelites did just what the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron, on that very day, the Lord brought the Israelites out of Egypt by their divisions. You have this difficulty of Pharaoh letting go. Again, the control issue. And look at the difficulty of when people in power suddenly don't feel like they have the power anymore. What is the natural response?
Give in.
Give in to what?
Well, after the Pharaoh's son dies, he decides it's time that I listen to.
Yeah, he does momentarily, but then
And he changes his mind.
he changes his mind because change is hard. Letting your slave labor go, letting your way of life go. I mean, this is kind of a huge thing for the Egyptian side of it.
Pharaohs are pharaohs,
Yeah.
They don't give in to nothing except when your child dies, then you decide, okay, let him go, and then all of a sudden he says, hey, I'm Pharaoh, I might as well go after him and get rid of
Well,
him.
if you think about what this would do to Egyptian society from the standpoint of, okay, well, now who's going to make all the bricks? Who's going to do all the stuff that they were doing? And how is, that, and so there's that pressure point again of Pharaoh kind of going, I can't quite let go of that control. So if you look at this from two different perspectives, if you look at it, and this is one of the things I liked about Pastor Chad's sermon that he gave a couple weeks ago on this, when he was talking about how if you are the slave, this is a great story. This is a story, if you are, if you're identifying with the oppressed, This is a wonderful story because it's about your freedom. If you are, however, on the side of the people who have the privilege and the comfort and are perhaps the ones that maybe are oppressing other people, this is not a good story. This is a story that is a story of warning. This is that says, hey, guess what? I can upend this at any moment. So if we identify a little bit more with Pharaoh or the Egyptians, this shows what happens when people lose their authority. I don't know what they're doing over there.
They're moving furniture.
Yeah, that loss of authority, that loss of power, how difficult it is to relinquish control.
With all the Egyptians.
Yeah.
You know, they look at him, he doesn't have any power anymore.
Well, the people don't wanna
That would be
make
a great
way up.
uprising.
And if you think of despots and tyrants, when they have to come face to face with the limits of their own power, it does not go well. It does not go well at all when people who are used to having everything done the way they want it done, and things going their way, when something, they have to come face to face with the fact that there is a limit to what they are allowed to do, they don't respond well to that. Oh. Hi, George. He's like, so when they get to, chapter 13, when they get to verse 17, when Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country, though that was shorter. For God said if they faced war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led the people around by the desert road toward the Red Sea. And the Israelites went up out of Egypt armed for battle. Moses took which is interesting that they're armed for battle, but he doesn't want them to actually go into battle. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him because Joseph had made the sons of Israel swear an oath, and he said, God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up with you from this place. After leaving Succoth, they camped at Etham on the edge of the desert, and by day the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them, and on their way by night a pillar of fire to give them light so that they could travel by day or by night. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of them. So God's presence right there. So what's God going to do? Verse 4, I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart. Chapter 14. And he will pursue them. But I will gain glory for myself through Pharaoh and all his armies, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. So the Israelites did this. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds about them and said, what have we done? We have let the Israelites go and have lost their services. So he had his chariot made ready and took his army with him. He took 600 of the best chariots along with the other chariots of Egypt, with officers over all of them. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, so that he pursued the Israelites who were marching out boldly. The Egyptians, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots, horsemen and troops, pursued the Israelites and overtook them as they camped by the sea near Pi-hahiroth, opposite of Baal-zephon. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelite looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. And they were terrified and cried out to the Lord, and they said to Moses, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone? No, they didn't. Let us serve the Egyptians? No, that's not what you said. It would have been better of us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. The Israelite disconnect. And when we get after they actually get past the Red Sea incident, it's just amazing how they sort of reinvent their history and their memory of what it was like in Egypt. But yeah. And again, it's this this image of Pharaoh coming after them, and again, I just always think of those pictures of Pharaoh driving his chariot, always in control, always, and here he is again thinking, this is how I seize control of this situation.
Now, did he, in the movie, he didn't go into the water with all his officers and men?
No, Pharaoh doesn't go in.
He stayed on the shore.
Yeah, he stood and watched. Yeah, yeah, and then goes the iconic Yul Brynner. Verse 15, then the Lord said to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. I like that. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. And the Lord said, no, move. Keep going. So actually, this is not, when you think about this story, this is not a story about conflict between the Israelites and the Egyptians. This is a story about the conflict between God and Pharaoh. Yes. Because he's like, no, you don't need to fight. I'm going to do this. I got this. I'm going to do the fighting. So it's between the two different forms of power.
That's so powerful.
Well, he
Yeah.
was considered God, Pharaoh was.
Yes.
He believed it himself, so.
So this is basically a battle between the two different types of power. God's power, Pharaoh's power. God's power, worldly power. That's what this is about. So the Israelites just are kind of caught in the drama. But this is a fight between worldly powers, God's power. And victory is not won by the force of arms. All the Israelites need is a way forward. And God gives them that. God says, okay, there's a sea here. I'll make it possible. You go on. Moses stretched, verse 21, Moses stretched his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind and turned it into dry land, and the waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground with a wall of water on the right and on their left. And then the Egyptians pursued them, and all Pharaoh's horses and chariots and horsemen followed them into the sea. During the last watch of the night, the Lord looked down from the pillar of fire and the cloud at the Egyptian army and threw it into confusion. And he made the wheels of their chariots come off so that they had difficulty driving. And the Egyptians said, let us get away from the Israelites. The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt. And the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea so that the waters may flow back over the Egyptians and their chariots and their horsemen. And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak the sea went back to its place. And the Egyptians were fleeing toward it, and the Lord swept them into the sea. The water flowed back and covered the chariots and the horsemen, the entire army of Pharaoh that had followed the Israelites into the sea, and not one of them survived.
But did Pharaoh survive?
Well, that's from the movie. It actually doesn't tell us what happened to Pharaoh. We don't. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Yeah. God won. The Israelites went through the sea on dry ground with a wall of water on their right and on their left. And that day the Lord saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians lying dead on the shore. And when the Israelites saw the great power the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and put their trust in him and in Moses, his servant. We'll see how long that lasts. Yep, when you're got your backed up against a wall or a body of water. And the power of this story really is in the ongoing effects of how it continues to be utilized throughout history as a story, a reminder. Like I said, the way in which it gets picked up by the African Americans during their slavery, and they use it. And when they were running the Underground Railroad, in fact, there was a woman, when she was doing that, they called her Moses. I mean, they wrote the song, "Let my people go." This is just the power of that story. Next time, what we're going to talk about, once the people have been set free, what does freedom actually look like? What does freedom actually look like? How does freedom take shape? Yeah. So you're free now.
40 years later.
Yeah. You're free now. So what is that going to look like?
You have to have some
Yeah, is it the ability to this freedom about pursuing your own interests and doing whatever you want, or does freedom still mean you got to have boundaries?
You gotta get along with each other.
Yeah. So really, this whole next section is about what does freedom look like? What does it look like to live into the freedom that God gives you, and how you interact with your neighbor, and what society is going to look like. And you know, these are big questions, because I mean, they're questions we still fight about today. You know, what is freedom?
Rules and regulations.
Yeah, what is freedom, and how do we live into freedom?
Yep.
So, but we'll stop there for tonight.
Parallels even after the Civil War when the slaves were free. Like,
And now what?
how would we do?
Now what do we do?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is, and
All through the Bible, it talks about people straying away from God
Mhm.
and then say, this is not what we want, and all of a sudden they come back to God.
Yeah.
And then another group strays away,
Oh, yeah.
and it's going, ongoing all the way through
humans
the Bible.
humans don't change very much.
No, it's
We really don't. We
if
just
you're
kind of
in
keep doing the same
1800s
things.
Reading the Bible, you're hearing about people being bad, and then then people get good, and then in the 20th century, it's the same thing over and over. You've got
Well-
all these people say, "Oh, everything is good, and we're worshiping the idols," and then all of a sudden God says, "No, you're not," and we're so sorry.
Well, and it's still a question, you know, the question of freedom that Christians had to deal with when it's Christ sets you free, and everybody went, woohoo, okay, it means we go to wherever we want, and Paul had to go, okay, no, that wasn't the point. You know, you're not free to do evil. You know, that's not what being free means. So, yeah, so we'll talk more about that next time.